I've done these things live. I've done Zoom. I've never done them live and Zoom at the same time.
This is new for all of us here
Right.
right now.
How many people are on the outside watching, you know?
Not right now, but
Oh.
we've had so far like 6 or 7 people join in.
Okay, I was just curious.
So
Perfect.
I'll start it up as soon as Marianne's here to introduce you. We'll have Q&A and questions in the chat, and Marianne or
Okay.
I will be.
Yeah, as long as someone's gonna watch
Yeah.
for them. Because I know when I did the couple of them on Zoom, I had somebody watching because
Yeah.
I'm more used to looking for hands.
So the mouse is working correctly. Yeah. I'll be sitting right here and
Yeah.
anything happens. You do a left click that leads to the next slide.
Will it go backwards too?
It will
No.
not go backwards.
Okay.
For backwards, you're just gonna have to use easier.
Okay.
That's what I've been using.
All right. As long as I can get back if I need to.
Yeah, the back is the left facing
Right.
key. Right. You just left click on there. and
Right.
choose next slide.
Lots of stuff going on here.
Okay. That's it. I'll be right here. It might be black. She's doing it.
Find some mushrooms out there.
We didn't, he went for a walk and I went to get ready. So, and he was out of time anyway, because it started a little bit late.
Okay.
So,
You finished?
yeah, I didn't know what they found. I just needed to go pull off a shirt
You
and
have to
grab
go
some
get
things.
Check your phone.
Oh.
Good. Okay, great. So I think we're just about ready. Yeah, we got one more minute, maybe. I know people. So greetings to everybody here and on Zoom. Thanks for being here. We'll have a few more people trickle in, I think. I'm Marianne Tebben, head of the Center for Food Studies at Bard College Simon's Rock. And we're here at ThinkFOOD in our presentation on silvopasture, and we're really thrilled to have Jeff Jourdain here. We just had a nice presentation on agroforestry, and this one is about silvopasturing. And Jeff is a consulting forester in Western Mass in Eastern New York. He's been doing that for about 35 years, so he has a lot of experience. And he helps with technical assistance to farmers and landowners to help them create and implement silvopasture. So he'll do his presentation. We'll have time for questions as well, both from our live audience and from you on Zoom. So welcome, Jeff, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Marianne. Thank you guys for being here. This is the first time I've done live and Zoom at the same time. I've done live, I've done Zoom, but anyway, so by way of background, yeah, I am a forester. I'm not a livestock person. I'm not a grass person. I got into silvopasture because a client was interested in this many years ago. We were looking for answers and there weren't a lot of answers at the time. So there's a lot of slides here to cover. Whether or not we get through them all, we might. But my wife, who used to prepare these for work, says I have way too many slides and too many words. So as I usually say, just sit back, hold on tight. Because we're going to go through some of these very fast, but questions, you can stop me during them, or you said somebody's going to watch the chat. So we'll go from here. So if you were in the last one, question I always start with, what is silvopasture? And if you were in the last group here with Mike Downey, you'll find out silvopasture is an agroforestry practice. He listed the rest of them: forest farming, riparian, alley cropping, forest farming, silvopasture are the 5, and there's another one that's thrown in there. Turns out that silvopasture is the most common agroforestry practice in the United States or in North America at this time. The other disclaimer I'll make here, as long as we're looking at the picture, I think my pictures now all have the right credits that go with them. If they don't, it means I pirated it from somewhere and don't know whose it was. If there's no credit, it's mine. But in most cases, there is a credit now. So what is silvopasture? We can go with a technical answer: the concurrent and intentional production of all 3, forages, livestock, and trees on the same acre at the same time. And what I mean by the same time, it's over the course of a year. It doesn't necessarily, you don't have cows in there or goats in there all the time. And that's from the guy at the Department in Pennsylvania. Brett Chedzoy, the spearhead for silvopasture in the Northeast is coming out of Cornell, and Brett is a forester for Cornell. He also raises Black Angus, has silvopasture, and has a ranch in Argentina. Been doing this for a while. Basically, it's an intensively managed system. Again, we're trying to do a lot of things at the same time on the same acres. Oh, there we go. Oh no. Something happened to that slide. I wonder if it's colors. Or else something got messed up when I moved it over. All right, yeah, no, this is the next one. This is supposed to be your basic Venn diagram with 3 big circles, but the colors, for some reason, didn't make the transition, which is odd because I've used this before. But you get picture a big circle here, represents trees. Another one here represents forage, whatever that forage is going to be. And another one has livestock. And where the 3 of them meet is where that arrow points. Again, I apologize for that, but I'm not sure what happened with that slide. That's all it is. What is silvopasturing not? As important as what it is, what is it not? And you see pastures out there with a couple shade trees and all the animals congregated underneath them during the summer to cool off or get out of the sun. That's not silvopasture. That's a tree in the pasture, okay? Nor is dense timber. For years, farmers would turn out their cows in the spring, bring them back in the fall, and they'd just be in the woods getting whatever they could eat, wherever they could get it. And there's a lot of places where there's nothing growing because there's just too much shade. So that's not what we're trying to do here. Okay, it is not woodland grazing. This I talked about wooded livestock grazing. It's not turning the cows out. This is turning the cows out, the old barbed wire. And they're just in there. And I was working next door to this one, and I happen to be in there and going by, and I'm like, perfect. This is one of the pictures. This is not what we want to do. There's no thought to it. It's just turn the cows out.
For the picture of the cows?
What's that?
Is that healthy for the cows?
They're no doubt they're still getting hay and grain. So this is something for them to do. You put them out, and whatever they eat means they're eating less of what you're paying to feed them. So is it healthy? I don't have a good answer to that. It depends on what they can get. But again, these cows I know went back to the barn to eat at night. Okay. The other ones that are just turned out for the summer, you get farmers that just didn't want to pay to feed them all summer. So as long as they weren't losing weight, it's going to be healthy. Okay. But you have ones that don't. Oh, you did it. Okay. I'm like, oh, what happened? Go ahead. You can. So what is silvopasture not? It's not leaving pigs do what pig things, as people say. Okay. This is a picture of a piece of property I was on. It's not a great picture of the screen in New Marlboro. And the pigs just had it. I mean, they were trying to call it silvopasture, trying to produce silvopasture, but obviously it's not. This is not what we want, okay? Forest dwellers, this was someone's Instagram page, okay? The same thing, it's ripped up ground. This is not what we want to see in silvopasture. It defeats that purpose in that Venn diagram that you couldn't see of managing for the forage, because obviously you're not managing the forage. You're also not managing for tree health because you're ripping all the roots up. So, but the pigs like laying in those cooler spots. This is a piece of property in Richmond, Windsor, excuse me, where he just let his cows loose. Now this cherry was probably 16, 18 inches in diameter and had some value to someone as saw timber, as commercial saw timber. Now it was just going to be a piece of firewood because the cattle just chewed on the bark and ripped it and rubbed on it as far as they could reach. The same thing with this ash. This is not what we want to happen. This is not silvopasture. This is just turning your cows loose and letting them go. Okay. This is that same piece of property where those cows were just standing in the woods. Obviously, it's too wet for the cows to be in there. And they're in there doing damage to the site, to the trees, to the forage, not silvopasture. And this is one that Joe works for Yale that he titled Manatee of the Woods. This is what happens when you leave pigs in there for too long. Pigs are great animals. Pigs can be great in the woods, but you leave them for 15 minutes too long, sometimes and you have a problem. Never mind for days too long. So this is what we're trying to avoid. Now, again, there we go. As I said before, I'm not a livestock guy. I'm not a grass guy. I got a dozen chickens. I don't have to worry about silvopasture. I did have an old horse and did create some at one time. But to be good at managing silvopastures and working with silvopastures, you have to be a good grazer on pasture. This is more complicated. If you can't handle rotational grazing in a very productive, excuse me, good way on pastures, you're going to have a harder time here. These pastures, these silvopastures, some of them are used for a week, a year, and that's all they're used for. You bring them through once, you bring them through twice, and that's it. So that's, excuse me, something I need to focus on is that you have to be a good grazer. So the question comes up is, why are we doing this? And why are we making it harder on ourselves? Why aren't we just turning animals out? And in general, why are we creating silvopastures? I mean, just like this ThinkFOOD conference, and one of the things in it is talking about the increased demand for local food. Okay, that has, and since the pandemic hit a year and a half ago, that's even become more of a thing, is that demand for local food is there. We're not getting any more land. We have the same land base. And so how do we grow more food for local food production without more land? Well, we have to use the land we have more optimally in a better way. And it's a challenge, to say the least. Let's go back. You can use silvopasture to restore degraded forest land and control invasive plants to a certain point, or interfering. And just because it's an interfering plant doesn't make it invasive. But in this case, they're chewing on some multiflora rose over in New York. But they can be utilized for that purpose. Now you can't turn, excuse me, goats and cattle loose in a pasture or silvopasture that is completely multiflora rose and expect that they're going to control it and restore it, but they can be used as tools in the right places. There's a shortage of pasture, goes back to that land. A lot of farms around will have some pasture, some hayfield, and then always a woodlot. There was generally always a woodlot that went with these. Well, how can we utilize that woodlot or something? And then the cost of creating pastures, not to mention the impact of creating pasture. These numbers, when I was just putting this together, I tweaked them a little bit. When I was using it, there used to be something over here said they were 2015 prices. These numbers were quite a bit lower. These are more in line with what people are paying now. You know, $4,000 an acre. You want it stumped, $3,500 an acre. You got $7,000 to $8,000 into 1 acre to clear it, chip it, and stump it. Now that doesn't include the grading, seeding, rock picking, or fencing. Okay. And I've worked with plenty of farmers who tell me every time I ask them this, how many animal units can we grow on an acre? How many cattle, how many parts of cattle or sheep or goats, because they have all these formulas that tell you with a good pasture, you can raise this much meat. Okay, at $8,000 to the acre, throwing the rest of this in, how much do you have to raise? Or how many pounds of meat do you have to, just for initial creation costs? So that's one of the reasons silvopasture has become as popular as it is, and for other reasons, because of the health of the animals and other things. But it's an expensive proposition to create pasture. The first project I worked on, which I think we'll see some pictures of, I was under the marching orders that this had to be, it couldn't be an expensive project, because he just got through with an expensive project of creating pasture. So he was like, let's do this, but I can't spend thousands and thousands of dollars an acre again, because there's no return. They're aesthetically pleasing. Whether you're going from pasture and you put trees in it to get that savanna look, or a well-managed forest with cows in it, cattle in it, goats in it, are aesthetically pleasing to a lot of people. It makes for a multiple use of the forest. Again, farmers got the woodlot in most cases, or in some cases, the only thing they ever used it for was cutting firewood, maybe selling some logs out of it. It wasn't used. Now they're utilizing their back 40, if you will. This is one of the bigger reasons we do this. There's a lot of benefits to livestock. There's a lot of reduced climatic stress, and climate change has made summers crazier. It's made them hotter. Black cattle, the Angus that you'll see in some of these pictures, they suck up a lot of heat in the sun. So if you can get them shaded, they'll be less stressed. They'll put more weight on. These are coming right out of some research that was done about calving, reduces calving difficulty. That I took from there. It does produce high quality forage. You get under these silvopastures, you will get cool season grasses growing. So what happens is in the summer, your pastures go into slump because of the heat. But in the woods, they're still cooled off, and you get a higher quality forage there, and then things will shift later on. And then economics. Okay, again, it's a function of numbers. How many pounds? How much money can I get? It extends your season. You'll get some frost protection in the woods. You also have sometimes places to put animals, as Brett likes to call them, living barns during the winter. And then it diversifies your revenue stream. Now you've got the woods producing wood and meat. And back to this whole thing with climate change and other things, a couple of big words being bounced around these days is carbon sequestration. This works well when you're converting pasture to silvopasture. If we're cutting trees to create silvopasture, converting forest land to silvopasture, we don't sequester that amount of carbon. Project Drawdown, which some of you may have heard about, analyzed 80 climate change mitigation solutions. Silvopasture was 9th on the list. It was 9th on the list when converting pasture to silvopasture. Okay. There's a lot of potential for silvopasture. This is over in central New York. This is what everybody pictures. Trees, lush forage underneath it. You can, I don't know if you can see it in the background, it gets bright over there, and then off to that direction would be more field. So when he thinned these things out, he already had a really good seed bank there. Thin them down, get the sun in there. He got grass growing reasonably easy. I wish they were all that easy. So how do we get there? Who is involved may not be as important for today, but how do we get from our existing pasture, our existing woodland to where we want to go, which might have been in that previous picture? It's not always easy. I wish it was, but it's not always easy. Again, there's two ways to get there. We can plant trees in an existing field, or we remove trees from the forest. This is what we're trying to do. Now, this is a project over on the other side of Quabbin, but if you could picture this before it was cut, and you can look and you can see some of the stumps in here, this entire understory was shaded. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get sun on the ground. That's all, that's it. But we're trying to utilize that sun once it's there to grow a forage so we can let everything else sit there. But we're trying to capture that sunlight and use it in another way. So first we'll take a quick look at converting pasture to silvopasture. This is not where my experience is, because most farmers that are going to convert pasture to silvopasture don't call a forester. They will do it themselves. They'll call other farming people. There's other people out there. One of the projects I was on, we actually did some clearing and then replanted it. So it's kind of the same thing. But so the point is, this is one of the ways we get there. Now, planting can be very expensive, okay? And what are we planting for? You're planting for shade, okay, because it's got that livestock benefit, okay? It's got the carbon sequestration benefit. We're planting for forage and fodder for the animals. You can plant mulberries and willows, and I don't know if I dare say it, the black locust, okay, because black locust is on the naughty list in Massachusetts, but in New York we deal with it. And black locust, we'll go off topic here, gets a bad rap in Massachusetts because it's native, not that far from here. It's one of those interfering plants, but it's not an invasive plant. It's in the wrong list. Anyway, you can plant for timber production. You can plant for windbreak. You can plant for nuts and apples and everything else, or mix them all together. Okay, you can do this with a lot of things. You can stack practices, multi-use. We could bring permaculture into this. A lot of permaculture plans that are done for homesteads, farmsteads, you will see the silvopasture word on a lot of them, okay? It's the agroforestry term. They use it all the time. Most of them are in orchard settings, whether it's nuts or apples, things like that, chestnuts, and they graze in between them, okay? It's a great way to do things. Okay. A few more things about planting. If you want to match the species that you're going to plant with your site and your soil conditions. This is a reason to talk to, whether it's cooperative extension, depending on where you are, or your friendly service forester, or a consultant forester, or another farmer, or one of the permaculture guys. You don't want to plant the wrong tree in the wrong place. And we have a good example is I was talking to one of my friends in central New York this week, and he wants to plant some chestnuts. But he brought up the point, it might be too wet. Chestnuts do not like wet feet. Okay, so he's going to take this time to buy these trees, put a tree tube on them, keep the deer off of them, and then watch them die. There's more species he's growing for different reasons, but if we're doing it from a silvopasture standpoint, things like willow or other things that like wet feet would be better fit. So again, you have to match the species. Select the species for future use, and that future use goes back to whether it's fodder or shade or timber or nuts or apples, whatever. That's a whole list, okay? And potential revenue, future revenue potential. so that you can get fruit production, you can get nut production, you get timber production. All these different things can be done on the same acres. It's not a great picture, but that's a young chestnut that we planted there. Your trees need to be protected. Protected from your cattle, your goats, your sheep. And then the one you're going to have more problems with is deer, particularly in southern Berkshire County, parts of New York. We're seeing more deer issues in places where we didn't have deer issues years ago. Populations generally up in a lot of places. Okay. Protection of livestock behavior. This goes back to what I'm saying. You have to be a good grazer and be ready to move these animals in the woods as much as you move them there. You're going to run into a problem with a bored animal is a trouble animal in the woods. That's when it's going to start rubbing on your trees. It's going to start browsing on your trees. If it's got good forage, it's going to leave those things alone. Okay. If you're planting the field, weed control is a big issue. Whether you're going to mulch with chips or bark mulch, cardboard, chemical use. I mean, there's people that do things different ways, but weed control on some of these trees are really important. Your planting can be done in swales. Swales have become very popular in the permaculture world. And they can be done on contour or with or without swales. As a friend of mine, and I won't mention any names, basically said one time was, if planting on contours makes you feel good about yourself, plant on contours. Okay, part of it is the shape of your field, how your field sits, your sun exposure, a lot of different things. But if you can plant on contours and you can put swales in, especially on a dry site to keep water there or a wet site to get water out, then they can be very important, but they don't have to be done that way.
Jeff, what are swales?
Swales is a ditch that's cut. So they dig this ditch. So you take what's in the ditch and you put it on the downhill side. So what happens if you're in a wet spot, you plant in the swale on the high spot to keep your roots dry. If you're in a dry spot, they'll plant sometimes in the low spot to catch more water. Again, we'll be out of planting here in a minute, but the perennial polyculture, you can mix things. Berries, we looked at planting shrubs on the first project we did, and willow's one of them, that have natural worming tendencies. So the animals will know what they need to eat when they need to eat it. Okay. Produce berries for humans, nitrogen fixing, medicinal uses. You can put quite an array of planting and mix it all up. Now we'll get into here for a little bit, going the other way, going from forest land to silvopasture. And that's where most of the work I've done with is worked with, because that's where landowners tend to need foresters. I'm old enough, and Marianne gave it up, that I've been at this for more than 35. I didn't tell her exactly how many, I just said more than 35. Is that when I was in forestry school, what I'm talking about, going to be talking about right now, would be considered sacrilegious, treasonous. You didn't put animals in the woods, okay? Livestock and forest don't mix. There's a whole lot of issues, and it goes back to what they did. You turn them out there if things were wet, roots got compacted, particularly in good hardwood sites. So now we're seeing good hardwoods die back because of that. My introduction to forestry book, which was published in '76, okay, talked about domestic grazing animals and the damage they did, okay, and that grazing animals are to be considered with other destructive factors in any protection plans. And there's still a lot of foresters who don't want to see animals in the woods. I don't want to see them on every acre in every place, but because we're dealing with a lot of second and third growth woods that are adjacent to fields and not necessarily have the best growing stock in them, it's a good place to do things. So if you talk to a forester and getting any, having any success, try to find someone else. Because there are a few people out there who are a little more open to it. That was in 1976. This happened to be a 2010 letter from, or something published by the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. Animals not be pastured in woodlands due to the effects they may have on trees. Okay, this is exactly what we heard 40 years ago. Okay, use the woods for woods, use the fields for fields. Okay, that's some of the bias you're still going to run into. So how do we go from here, an overstocked woodlot, to, or here, which you see a thick understory, to this? Okay, this is where things aren't always easy. This happened to me up in the Adirondacks. It starts with a plan. What do I have to work with? Hardwood, softwood, volume, stocking levels. In Massachusetts, we would look at priority habitat maps to see if there's any natural heritage issues, all these things that's going on. You want diversity. Is what's growing suited to this site? Do we have an invasive issue? Do we have a thick understory? Okay. The plan can be a simple plan. This was a landowner map that we had made from his forestry plan. But when it was time to do his silvopasture, we just drew some lines, looked at what we had out there. You can go for a full-blown forestry plan that identifies your resource quantitatively, gives you all these numbers and stocking levels and other things. You need to identify your goals and objectives. What are you trying to get out of this? And this should be said for any forestry management plan, whether silvopasture is a part of it or not. Okay, you need to know what you want out of this. If all this planning and implementation does not meet your goals, no matter how successful the project seems to be, it was not a successful project. Okay. And you need sound forestry. Remember that Venn diagram? We had livestock, we had forage, and we had the trees. If your forestry is not sound and you're not managing for those trees, okay, the project doesn't work. The way I like to look at that Venn diagram was you got 3 legs to that stool. And if your forestry leg is no good, what's going to happen with that stool? It collapses on itself. If your forestry is really good and you don't manage for your livestock, as a silvopasture, it collapses on itself. But if the forestry is good and you never put the animals in there, we just did a good forestry cut. We're trying to grow the best quality trees we can. It goes back to that future potential revenue. Okay. And this is what I said before. We're trying to get sunlight onto the ground. We're trying to utilize that sunlight. If you don't get sunlight, you're not going to get vegetation. If you can't grow your forage, or if you're growing for browse for goats, your livestock doesn't eat enough. Your livestock doesn't eat enough, you don't get that weight gain potential. And the question came up before, is it healthy for the animals? They don't have enough to eat? No, it's not healthy for the animals. When you're going from forest land to silvopasture, you're trying to put, as we call them, a team together. Now, in some cases, the landowner may act as the logger, the landowner may act as the manager. But if you can't work with the right people, or the people you're trying to work with don't understand what you're trying to do, change people. So when we go to establish these, we already talked about planning, we know the management, we got the team, we got the care. And I thought they were in here, and I don't see it. There's 2 more things from the landowner's viewpoint that should be in here. And again, I thought the slide was in here, but I finished this last night. I may not have got it in here. You need to have patience. And the last one is reasonable expectations. Now, what are you looking for? Okay, are you looking for this? Are you looking to change your pasture in? And the reason I stress reasonable expectations is I did a job out by somewhere. And I don't want to bring up where, I don't know who's watching. And I met with my client in the woods. I was out laying out their silvopasture or their harvest. And she said to me, she says, you don't, in our discussion, that I didn't think this was going to work. So I just thought about that all afternoon while I was working, drove back home, and then sent a long email. I says, I think it's going to work just fine. I says, but I don't think you guys know what you're getting. I don't think you have reasonable expectations. Her partner was envisioning oak trees 50 feet apart and waist-high flowing lush grass like you'd see in a savanna. No stumps, no roots, no rocks. And she was going to maintain it with her tractor and livestock. And that's just not reasonable based on the conditions we had. We're in the highlands, there were rocks everywhere. We're about to have all kinds of wood cut, so there's going to be stumps everywhere. Okay, so you have to have reasonable expectations. There we go. I knew the slide made it.
Would you have to remove the stumps?
You know, you would not want to remove them for a couple of reasons. One, go back to that slide that talked about costs. Okay, the cost of bringing in equipment to take that out. And now, what are you going to do with it when you take out a stump with a root ball that's bigger than this table?
Yeah, I prefer to leave the stumps.
Well, the other thing is it really, really messes with your soils. It messes with your soil biology. It messes with everything. Now you've got a crater there. So what are you going to do? And if you got stumps that are 10 feet apart, how many do you take out? So no, you don't want to take stumps out. The other thing is, go back to our stool. If you decide not to do this, or you try it and it doesn't work, so you've had the wood cut, good sound forestry cut, now you've removed all these stumps. How much impact have you created on that site to get the next cohort of trees growing? Okay, and then to utilize that site with all the stumps missing. We're going to go talk about, hopefully here, a few where we've done some things, we've got some positive experiences out of this. So the good part is there are positive experiences, but you know what another slide is going to say down the road, okay? And we'll get to that because it goes back to things. Most of the time when I've worked on these are big commercial operations, okay? A lot of guys and women that go to forestry school go because we get to play with big Tonka toys, okay? There's something about diesel engines and noise and trees coming down. They don't have to be done this way. It depends on where you are, how big of a project. It's all economics of scale, and the wood you're dealing with, okay? Some wood you just can't deal with from an economic standpoint without going big. This is that same project. This happened to be the project with the woman who wanted to maintain it with a tractor. And you can see we have a few rocks around, okay? We're taking out big pine. These, you can't tell what they are, but those are all young oak and hickory. So we were leaving the trees with the best future potential for value growth and future value, and taking out softwood. And you won't see it, but this one would be gone, this crooked maple. Again, we're trying to grow the best trees we can. Again, big equipment, rocks, stumps. This case, it happened to be being fed through a chipper, which the service forester up in the back here that's joining us, Mike Downey, used to work out here. Learned things were a little different in the central part of the state, where everything gets chipped. They're close to chip markets. It gets done that way. We're too far from chip markets. It doesn't happen from a commercial logging standpoint. The good thing from a silvopasture standpoint with chip markets is all this you would see here in a logging operation is left in the woods. When we can chip it, we can take it out. Now we've got ground. We've got that sun hitting dirt. We're going to get things to grow. When you deal with silvopasture, trying to deal with slash is one of the biggest issues. Okay, this is that site out in the central part of the state. We got sunshine on the ground. We got shade on the ground. We got a combination of both things. We also, what you don't see is all that slash. It all went through the chipper and out of there. So now we have a site that can be seeded and hopefully get live forage to grow. Okay, this is the same spot. This, I mean, you're never going to have all the slash picked up, and that's fine. We don't want the slash picked up, all of it. I mean, we want it there for wildlife reasons. We want it for nutrient cycling reasons. We want it for a lot of other reasons. So you're going to get places like this. What'll happen is you'll get grass growing here, and then maybe here where you have some slash, it won't come in as well, but then you'll get some other browse or things growing, and you get that diversity in their diets. Because if you got tree seedlings growing up in here, and they start eating them, they're going to get something different in their diet than they will just straight from forage. As long as we're talking about tree regeneration, one of the raps by the foresters is, well, how do we get trees to regenerate? How do we get the next crop growing? Getting this silvopasture to regenerate or getting a forest to regenerate becomes a management decision. When are we going to do that? When do we start planning? Whether it's now or 20 years from now. And 20 years from now, it might be, we'll do another harvest, take the animals out, let it regenerate. Or if you've got a pocket of good regeneration, now with portable fencing, you can fence it off, keep the animals out until it's up higher, and then let them back in. Again, it's a management decision. This is another way to handle with big equipment, how things come out of the woods. Okay. Out here in the western part of the state, we couldn't chip it. How were we going to deal with the amount of slash? And this happened to be in a spot where there was a lot of softwood that was getting affected or impacted badly by the hemlock woolly adelgid. So we wanted to get it out of there. So we said, well, we still want these reasonably clean spots for grass to grow, forage to grow. What do we do with all the slash? We worked it out with the logger. Then he took the slash and piled it in these long windrows, which we couldn't put on contour because of the shape of the property. And then he drove on those so that we had these spots. It became a mix of silvopasture and alley cropping, back to your first one. So every 100 feet, we had these rows of slash that we then, in some places, planted along. And it was a way to get the site cleaned up. Okay, this is one of the ways we stockpile things with these big grapple skidders. Okay, this was a 30-acre cut over in Hudson Valley. Rather than long windrows, we designated 6 to 8 spots and said these are going to be sacrifice areas. This has no commercial value. It's branches, it's tops, it's slash. So we were just stockpiling them in certain places to get them, and I think the next slide will show it. No, different spot, but it's the same type of thing. We were stockpiling like this so that we can get ground that we can get seed onto. Seed doesn't like to grow if it can't find dirt. Okay, this is that one in central New York after, or Hudson Valley after snow came in, but you can see that the site after it was thinned out is reasonably clean of debris because we stockpiled it in those big piles. You can do it small scale tractor logging. I've showed you the big pictures. This is how I did mine. That happens to be my tractor. No, and I didn't make my daughter do the work, but it was her horse. You can do it small scale, okay? One of the best things about this practice, it is a scalable practice. I did quarter or third of an acre. Okay, there's cuts going on in central New York in the Finger Lakes, creating 175 acre silvopastures. Okay, I've worked with some farmers around on 2 acres, on 3 acres, and I've worked on them, you know, 25, 30 acres. So again, it's a scalable practice. This was put in, looks good. Forwarder is going to come through, pick those up, bring them out to the log truck, and we're left with a site. Well, we got some pine branches around. This was done as a regular harvest. This was not a silvopasture harvest. And it left it in there to show that depending on what you have for trees being left and going, you don't necessarily have to worry about dealing with slash. There's enough ground showing here, okay, that we're going to get forage to grow without stockpiling, without chipping, without anything else. It all depends on what you have to work with. This picture's in here for that reason. The other thing is, low shade is harder to deal with than high shade. Okay, you picture this tree, this tree, this tree, that tree. Those tops are up 80 feet high, 90 feet high. Okay, this is a good pine site, so they're really tall. So as the sun comes across, you can get sun coming underneath the trees and through the tops of the trees. But you see what's growing here? These understory hemlock. Those crowns start 6 feet off the ground, and they're big bushes, Christmas tree type things. You don't get sun penetrating that low shade. So those are one of the things we focus on trying to get out of there, so that you get sun coming from the top. As it turns out, this is facing south, so that the sun would come back in this way. Okay, there's another picture. You can see the big hardwood, how far up the main canopy is, and you can see this hemlock, shade tolerant hemlock. It's just producing for the size of the tree and in the place how much shade it produces. We talked about it's sizable, okay? You can do them by hand, you can do them with a tractor. What do you do for a spot that you can't take any wood out? They're not ready for commercial operation. This was in central New York. There are these these forestry mowers around, and it grinds them up and leaves you with a site that is ready to seed. Or in this case, there was existing pasture here, you know, over there, it probably didn't have to seed. Okay. Reasonable expectations and follow through. If you don't follow through, what do you end up with? You end up with an incomplete project. If the forestry is sound, it's okay because we got a good forestry cut. Don't put the animals in. Okay, and then quickly here, some of the not so positive experiences. These are things that happen when you don't follow through. Okay, that cut I told you about we took all that hemlock out because of hemlock woolly delta, a non-native invasive insect. It was planned out, it was going to get cut, it was going to get fenced, the cattle was going to get put in there, going to get seeded. We're going to have forage growing. It didn't get seeded. Okay. The animals never went in here. Most of what you see is pin cherry, which comes in on disturbed sites. There's a whole bunch of blackbirds in there as well. Okay. So now from a silvopasture standpoint, we've got a project that was not a success. And it was disturbing at first until I realized, well, the hemlock was all dying from the bug. And you go through here, again, a big chunk of it's pin cherry, which is only going to live so long. But what it's doing is helping protect that black birch that's in there. So from the forester side of my brain, it says, I'm good. The side that I was hired to get this set up for silvopasture is like, this thing failed. The other thing I'll say is usually once the harvesting's done, I'm not on site anymore, so I got to go back and look at these things. I don't know what happens. But this was an incomplete project because they never put the animals in. Okay, that's that same spot. You can see this dense young growth. Now, you let the cattle and the goats in there, they're going to love that. But you also have an issue in places, being that most of it's cherry. Green cherry leaves are fine. Dead cherry leaves are fine. It's those wilted ones that are in between that can get cattle sick. When in that wilted stage, they basically produce a cyanide compound. It's been known to kill creatures. A lot of farmers out here don't worry about it too much because there's plenty of cherry in and around the pasture, so that the animals have got some tolerance built to it. But it could be an issue, okay? So now what do we do? Well, let me rephrase that. Now what does he do? Because this isn't a forestry operation at this point anymore, okay? This is one where I showed you where they were chipping, okay? No follow-up, no seeding. These are sedges. There's nothing like to eat the sedge, okay? And it turns out there's I think there's 25 goats in that flock, I guess it is. We cut 50 acres. The numbers don't match, okay? So even if they fenced 5 or 10 acres of it for the goats and seeded it, and it turned into perfect silvopasture, okay? The rest of it was all going to go by because this flock could not eat that fast enough to keep it in the right stage. So again, you have to follow through. Okay, again, this is that same place. Looks nice. I mean, the goats love it. Okay, the goats absolutely love it, but it's not being utilized for silvopasture the way it was supposed to be because they didn't follow through. This was several years after it was cut. All right. After they're cut, generally around here, we'll recommend they get seeded. And Joe got his PhD in silvopasture as a researcher down at Yale. This is a seed mix that works well for us in the Northeast. We're not going to spend much time there. You need to follow the plan. You need to follow up. And one of Brett's statements, we talked about before, the silvopasture is only as good as the quantity and quality of the forage. Okay, even as good as the forestry can be, but from the livestock's point of view, the livestock doesn't care that we're growing 15 and 18-inch oak over the top of them. They want to know what they can eat. This one's might be out of sequence a little bit. You want to put your seed down as soon as you can, because that's when you have your site disturbance. That's when you have that exposed dirt. Okay, that's what we want to put the seed on. And in most cases after harvest, that's when you have the least amount of understory to deal with, because it just hasn't grown back yet. And goes back to that low shade as well. The Adirondacks. How else do we get seed into the woods? You can put bales in. These bales here are actually doing two things. They're set on top of multiflora rows, so that as the cows all congregate around them, they stomp and beat the multiflora rows in. Okay, this is again in central New York. That's what it looks like in the spring. And this is something I've got a lot of mileage out of Brett's statement here. You want to start small, because if you got 50 acres and 25 goats, it's not going to work. You want to start small because we don't want to have this good forestry cut all turn to pin cherry and black birch. And he puts it different ways. Better start with a small train wreck than a big train wreck. I've had several clients skip the small train wreck. We're taking this whole train right off the tracks. Okay. Again, the forestry was sound. I don't have any problems with what we did. But if we're trying to, we're trying to establish silvopasture, start small if you can. Quick likes and resources. Forest Connect is a Cornell extension website. They have all kinds of stuff on forestry there. There is a whole bunch of stuff on silvopasture. I believe now, well, they have the PowerPoint presentations from the big first Northeast Silvopasture Conference in 2011. Some of it may be available on Cornell's YouTube channel, I believe it is. This is Forest Connect's silvopasture agroforestry listings. They got all kinds of publications there. They also have a Ning site, which is a networking site, completely unlike Facebook or anything else. It is strictly silvopasture, and they announce meetings, they announce research that's going on. People join, will ask questions. It's a good. I look at it weekly to see what's going on with again presentations and other things. Joe, as part of his PhD, did a photo guide to northeastern silvopastures. I think it's referenced at 80K Figs, which is his old website. I also think it's on the Cornell Forest Connect page, and it shows different ways to cut things to get different looking silvopastures, whether it's native forest or orchard. Regenerative Agroforestry Podcast has got some things on it. The Northeast Mid-Atlantic Forestry Agroforestry website has got notices about meetings and other things. There's a couple new resources here. Here we go. University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry has got things. Savannah Institute, which is based in the Midwest somewhere. And then Steve Gabriel, who works for Cornell Extension, is a farmer in the Finger Lakes, wrote a book entitled Silvopasture Guide to Managing Grazing Animals, Crops, etc. in the temperate farm ecosystem. There's some good material in there. And here's the key. There it is. Time, patience, teamwork, collaboration, and reasonable expectations. You can get to where you want to go. I think that's it.
Great. Thank you. So I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. If people have questions for Jeff or
Anything show up
want to
there?
make any comments, we'll get to the questions. So anybody here want to ask a question? Follow up? Go ahead.
If you have to choose the plants, whatever, for your soil, why wouldn't you also choose the animals for the landscape and the process of?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is yes. I'm not I agree with what your statement. I don't deal with the animal side, so I can't answer that directly. But any of these places, whether it's places that we've converted from woodland to pasture or pasture to woodland, the farmer generally knows ahead of time what they're going to raise. You're going to get cattle farmer that don't want to do anything with goats. You got sheep farmer that don't want cattle. So if your site, back to sourcing or citing which plants to plant, if it's too wet for a lot of things to grow, it's probably too wet to have your animals in it. Okay, both from a forage quality standpoint, and there's certain animals, and I know a friend of mine raised sheep. He got rid of certain sheep because they had foot problems. If it's too wet, you're gonna make those foot problems worse. So again, I just haven't had to deal with that part of the equation, because when I get the call, it's for the trees. So, but yes, you want to match your trees to the site, but you have to match your animals to the site, and it has to fit in with the farm goals, the landowner goals of what you want to raise. And if they don't work, you either don't raise those animals, you don't raise those trees, or you don't convert it to silvopasture. If you go to that Cornell Forest Connect site, they actually have an evaluation form that they developed. And it basically rates and grades and scale for numerical scale the site. Is it close to water? Is it this? Is it too wet? Is it too dry? Is it too steep? Is it too rocky? You go down the list and you get a grade. And then you look at the chart and it says, if it's above this grade, it's a great place to do this. If it's between here and here, you can do this, but it's going to take some work. If it's below this, don't bother. Okay, so some of that would play into there. If you've got a really, really wet site, planting trees in it might be a really good thing for that site, but it still may not be a good place to put your animals.
Great. All right, I'm sure we have a few more minutes. We're going to break for lunch now. But I want to thank Jeff for this presentation and all the information he gave us. And for breaking for lunch, we'll come back at 1:30 for World Conflict. So thank you to all who've been attending via Zoom or in person. And thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Really, I love it. The goats look pretty happy, even though you.
Yeah, they
you're
didn't.
in the area.